an eye out for that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, happy to help.
Thank you. So with that, here we go. Okay, so we're just going to kind of talk through. Let me pull this over to where I need it. There we go. So wanted to start, and many of you who have heard me speak before have seen this. I think it's sort of a good lay of the land of what we're talking about when we're talking about what is affordable housing. So quick disclaimer, this is out of date. We are very busy, and I still haven't gotten around to doing the math on home prices for the current AMI. So know that area median incomes, which are represented on the left side of the screen over here, are out of date. Those have gone up, so just know that. So each year, HUD, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department, gives us what's called area median income numbers. And our area median income is for all of Deschutes County. Right now, for a household of 4, which is what's represented on this slide, or last year, I should say last fiscal year, area median income was $80,400 for a household of 4. What that translates to is what folks roughly can pay on the right side. These are the numbers, the home price numbers that I really need to update, because if you look at the small print down at the bottom, I'm using a 3.94 interest rate to come to that number. So that is extraordinarily out of date in this market, but it was a starting place last year when this was actually a little more realistic. Either way, the point is that someone at median income cannot get anywhere near home price and what folks are actually selling in the market these days, or renting as well. So median income, 30% of your income going towards rent would be about $2,000 a month. And that's hard to find here. Median home price at the time I created this slide was about $650. It has fluctuated up to mid to high 700s over the last year or so. So again, this is out of date. Point is, can't do it at median income here. In order to be in affordable housing in the city of Bend, you can make no more than 80% of area median income in order to qualify for affordable ownership, or 60% of area median income in order to qualify for rental housing. And that roughly translates into what the home price could be, or the rent could be, in order for a building to be affordable. There's a lot more complex than that, but that's sort of the simplest explanation. Before I move on, I am going to stop and see if there are any questions about this. Okay, please feel free to holler if they come up. So wanted to give a little kind of quick historical snapshot of Bend. You can see that the total number of housing units we had in the city in the 1990s was under 10,000. And this graph goes through 2013. We're now over roughly about 45,000 housing units in the city of Bend, and we do expect that to continue. So this is what it looked like at the time, with the darker color being single family, the lighter color being multifamily, and then there were a handful of, single family attached, which was like townhomes or duplexes, kind of within that. And what that looked like in terms of affordability was this. This is from the 2015 ACS 5-year estimates. And this graphic was prepared by EcoNorthwest, an economics consulting firm in the state. This was actually when Bend 2030 was Bend 2030. They're now Envision Bend, and they did a middle income, or what they called, I think, workforce housing project back then. So that 60% AMI bar, this is showing that we had a shortage of roughly 5,000 units for people making 60% AMI and under. At this time. At the same time, we had a little bit of a surplus in some of those higher income units. There were more on the market. They weren't selling maybe quite as easily, but you can see kind of where the shortages are in the units that were on the market at the time. And the bars that are red and below the line show the deficit, and those above the line show a surplus. That has changed now to a more recent report. This was from the state Regional Housing Needs Analysis, and I promise you I will move off of numbers very soon. But this shows actually an underproduction of housing units. This is 2019 ACS 5-year estimates that really is now in every category. So looking again at the AMI levels, that's the same thing as that first house chart. we now have a shortage even in the highest income ranges. Remember that in 2015 was actually a surplus of units. So if you want to represent, I'm a visual person, I don't love just looking at numbers in a spreadsheet, the shortage, this 9% of what's needed in the market is above 120% AMI. About you probably have heard a little bit about the Chamber Workforce Housing Initiative. This is the bucket that they're really talking about. 25% of our needed housing stock is in that 80 to 120% AMI range. And then everything else, almost 2/3 of what we need to produce is in that affordable housing range, 80% AMI and below. So I'm actually going to flip back really quickly. I hope this isn't too annoying. To this. So 80% AMI and under, that means we're trying to sell homes, roughly at 300,000 and under. So that's the challenge in front of us. So now we're moving on past the numbers as I promised. This is the makeup of the city's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. They are council appointed, unlike the NLA. And they represent various different industries in town. This is intentionally not made up of a bunch of advocates. That was a very intentional decision by the city. And this group is really seen as the technical arm for council on all things housing. So these are the folks who know how to get housing and housing affordability built in the city of Bend. They are really high functioning right now. They meet every month on the second Wednesday of the month from 3 to 5, and Michaela can send you all more info. It's also all over the website. We'd love to have folks from your groups attend at any point, provide input, and help us achieve our goals in what we do. So please feel free to come along. And if you happen to be an affiliate of any of these institutions in any way, shape, or form, you can utilize your AHAC representative to help be the conduit for information. That's really why it's set up this way as well. So talking about housing affordability, this is the continuum of housing in really across, I'd say, our spectrum of, well, really the country or world. So some folks are homeless. The idea is that as you move through life, you potentially move through, some of these different steps in the continuum. Some people skip some people never touch some, and some people never get past where they are right now. That's fine. But the idea is the AHAC and the Affordable Housing Program or Housing Program is creating affordability at each of these steps. And the way we do that is through very different policies and mechanisms at each one. So I'm going to walk you through some of those. Quick pause. Any questions so far? Okay. So I'm not going to read each of these, but I will go through some of the steps that the city has taken to address each of these issues and creating sort of solutions or affordability with each. Homelessness is really about life saving and life preservation and trying to keep our streets as safe as we can and create places that folks can go. We know we can't build enough housing as quickly as our communities need. There's a very direct and deliberate link between housing production, housing availability, rent prices, and homelessness. So some of you have heard me say for every 10% increase in rent, there is a corresponding 13% in rise of homelessness nationally. And we have had extraordinary rent increases over the past number of years in Bend, which is a significant part of why you're seeing homelessness much more visible now. So the city has really started to address this in various different ways. We have a brand new staff person, Sherry, who is working within the right of way to try to make sure that camps aren't getting out of control and that folks are using the shared right of way as well as we all can in a shared environment. And I'm not saying that well, but the idea is we can't just clear people out of the street even when they are disruptive. And so we're creating ground rules and trying to find that sort of shared understanding of how to progress in these times. Part of how we're doing that is through creating emergency shelters and other solutions within that. The city has invested in 3 facilities over the last year-ish, maybe it's been closer to 2 at this point, but it's been very recent. This is really the first time the city has deliberately invested in this way in solutions to bring people off the street and into more permanent housing, though we have funded services and other facilities for a number of years. The shelter code is one of the steps towards providing clarity. I think the NLA was very involved in that discussion as it evolved. Transitional housing is another step, and we're working very closely with Deschutes County on this. Cities have obligations under the law to help with homelessness and providing shelter. But historically, that sort of mechanism has really been a county level system. They receive funding for behavioral health, for instance, and different sort of transitional type facilities. And so we're doing the dance with them of figuring out how do we address such an increase together and what are the roles and responsibilities. One of the things that I'm very excited about, I think it was on the last slide, is the creation of a collaborative office to address houselessness. And we hired a director. She technically works for the county, but is also very responsive to Eric King, our city manager, and her name is Cheyenne Purrington. She's got a ton of experience in this whole realm and is really hitting the ground running. So she'll be a great person to hear from as time goes on. Supportive housing, this is another really exciting project, joint project between Housing Works, our regional housing authority, Neighbor Impact, our community action agency, the city of Bend, and others. I think the county also came to the table for this one, creating permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing, or PSH, is extraordinarily important. In order to be, it's for chronic homelessness, and folks who are chronically homeless are not just there for duration. In order to be considered chronically homeless, you also have to have a qualifying health condition, whether it's mental or physical. And so these are folks who largely aren't going to move up that continuum very far. They just need support for the length of their lives, whatever that looks like. And so this is going to be a small, but our first dedicated permanent supportive housing development in the city of Bend for folks who are chronically homeless and need long-term services in order to get off the streets and move forward. So this is really exciting. City of Bend and Deschutes County has one of the lowest rates of shelter for homeless folks that we have in our county. Across the country, we are consistently towards the very bottom of the pile in this. So working very hard to provide shelter and ensure that folks have a safe place to go so that they are not out in the elements. Today, that feels particularly necessary. Oh, Roberta,
Hey,
yes.
Lynn.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that 33 units, what's the need?
Oh, good question. The need, it's hard to define specifically, Ron. That's a really fantastic question. It's roughly around 200 folks are chronically homeless in Deschutes County right now. As we know, those numbers are somewhat mobile. Folks may have come from Crook County, but are here for instance, for services, or they may be in Crook County with, family members, but this is sort of their home, things like that. But roughly 200 is what we're looking at. And then Roberta.
Oh, just had a question about expected in 2024.
Yeah.
Why so long?
Yeah, great question. It takes a heck of a long time to develop these. And why we don't have PSH in Bend right now is not the actual physical building structure. That to me is somewhat of the easy part. And I say that, and everyone in our building division would glare at me if they knew I was saying that, because it's not easy. But compared to the services that are needed and funding those services for the long term, that's the missing piece that we have really been struggling with for a long time. And so when I talk about the relationship with the county, that's part of that critical element, is because in order to build this type of housing, the developer has said we need a 10-year commitment of service providers, because these are pretty high level folks. They're typically clinical level people that we need to provide these services, in addition to the traditional property management type services. And there's no money for that. Nobody can guarantee 10 years of service provision that will float state bienniums in any way that is guaranteed. It's really hard to lock money down for that long for this. So there's been a couple of steps that we've gone towards to get there, such as the state just expanded Medicaid. Medicaid expansion here allows for some housing services. That's a really great step in the right direction. But again, it gets technical. Medicaid's not the answer on its own. It's one step. Deschutes County is part of the solution. We also do not have providers locally who can do this level of service and have done it historically. Portland has a number, Eugene has some. We've worked with them to try to figure out if they can come and provide services here, but moving people here to Bend is really hard at this salary range. So lots of factors like that. And that's been the missing piece, is that long-term funding commitment for supportive services. I hope that helps, Roberta, before I move on to the next question. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Shannon. I think you're muted, Shannon. I'm not sure if you're, see if I can fix that.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
Back to, there was a slide earlier that I think showed that there are the number of housing units that were built, and I want to say it was in 2019, that above 120
Were you thinking of
AMI was
this one?
15,000 units versus, so twice the number in that 120,000 than the next category down.
Mm-hmm.
Am I reading that right? So even when there's a deficit, it's going to get built even at that upper end.
Great question. Yeah. So our total deficit in 2019, this is pre-COVID, according to the state, the number of units that we needed to serve the population kind of on the ground in 2019 was 3,600.
Yeah,
that's what we were short at the time. So that wasn't looking at future projection or what happened during COVID, for instance, where we all know there was a lot of activity in and out. But this was our shortage at the time. And that's represented by these different income categories. I don't think I explained that well. Thank you, Shannon, for.
No, I got it.
Is this helping?
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is that actual number of units built in that category was 15,044.
Got it. Yeah, that's the total that we need. What was on the ground at the time was this 14,706. Sorry, I'm using the mouse on that. 14,706 is on the ground. What we actually needed for the population in town at the time was 15. So we were only short 338 in that category. And then are you asking like what has been built since then?
So right. So did 15,000 units get built in that category?
Great question. I haven't done the work to determine if we have built this 338 since 2019 when this work was done. That's a great question. My suspicion is, if not, we've gotten pretty close on this one. I can tell you that we have not hit these numbers in the affordable range.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question, on the homeless population, a third of 1% is on commercial industrial construction, right? And does that come through SDCs?
No, that's different.
How is construction defined, and where does that come into play with?
Yeah, so great question. And I'm actually, let me just scroll on my background slide and make sure, because I think I'm going to talk about this in a sec.
Okay.
Oh no, I'm not. I'll stop right now. So the city of Bend has 3 current funding sources to address housing and homelessness that are permanent. Most of the funds that we have put in the last few years, other than the 3 that I'm about to talk to, are ARPA funds or other relief funds, which is not permanent. That's one time. So the 3 funds that we have right now that are permanently established to address housing and homelessness, all the things I'm going to talk about, are number 1, our affordable housing fund. Number 2, what I call our construction excise tax, and that's the one that's at the top of this sheet. And number 3, federal community development block grant or CDBG funding. So affordable housing fund, and I'll get to this in a later slide, but I'm just going to give you the summary right now, was created in 2006. It's a third of 1% on all building permit valuation. So what that means is when somebody comes to build a house or an apartment or any number of things in Bend, on their permit application, they estimate what the total value, and this is different than sales price. This is the value of the property will be once it's constructed. And based on that estimate, we take a third of a percent. It determines their permit costs, et cetera. And we take a third of a percent on all permits. and put it into this fund. That's the Affordable Housing Fund. Shortly after we did that, we were first in the state. A lobby of builders got together and prohibited that from happening anywhere else in the state of Oregon. That's now known as what's called a construction excise tax. But at the time, nobody was really talking about it as such. So 2006, ours is grandfathered in Affordable Housing Fund. In 2016 or 17, that prohibition was lifted. And that's when we all started talking about that as a construction excise tax. In the meantime, we've had federal CD, and I'll come back to that. CDBG is federal funding. We get about $500,000 roughly a year, and that includes the administration of the program. Only 15% of that, which is roughly $70,000 a year, can go towards services. Everything else goes towards sticks and bricks related items. So back to the construction excise tax. So we cruised along, did a lot of consulting with other folks in the state on how to run funds like this. And then in 2020, our council decided we really needed to get serious about this 0 to 30% AMI need. So this is, at the time, this was somebody working full-time minimum wage with a household of 4 and anyone less than that. So it's quite a bit of our population. So they created a construction excise tax. It is also 1/3 of 1% on permits, but this one is only attached to commercial and industrial permits. And the reason for that is that if we attach it to residential permits, a whole bunch of new rules kick in from the state, because in allowing these types of things to happen, they created a whole bunch of rules. And some of those include sending money back to the state that we then don't have access to. It comes back to the jurisdiction, but it may or may not come back through the city. So because of that, council wasn't really interested in doing a residential commercial excise tax. So they just attach it to commercial and industrial permits. We're not raising a ton of money with this right now. It was just implemented in 2021, right about when COVID hit. So not a lot of commercial industrial development going on. And AHAC, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, will do the first allocation of those funds starting actually in a week and a half, 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today is their meeting to deliberate on some of those funds. So really, really exciting. That could be used for services and for sticks and bricks units. That was an extraordinarily long explanation for what I think you asked, but we do have 3 funds. This one is the newest as of 2020. And we have a little over 100,000 that's been collected in that fund. We've also added some ARPA to the mix, relief funds, so that we can build that out and really have a good allocation. So before I move on to Karen, did that help, or did that take you just way into the wormhole?
No, not at all.
Okay.
My only question follow-up would be, what % of our construction is commercial and industrial versus residential?
Great. It's a very small percent. And so part of what is challenging is that with COVID hit, we were estimating it was about 45% of construction at the time. And there are fewer by number because single family homes are being produced all the time, for instance, or smaller units, fewer in number for commercial, but larger scope, I'd say. So it was raising more money. That tanked in COVID. And so some of our predictions, well, all of our predictions proved inaccurate. We also counted some stuff that we shouldn't have within that, and that's a fault of staff. And so we're figuring out what the next steps are. One of the ways I think this group can engage going forward is revenue is going to be a big question. How do we do it? And how can we more effectively do what we need to do? And I think that those are going to be really good discussions to have a broad audience participating. So with that, I'm going to move on to Karen, if that's okay. Karen?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
You had indicated, I know we talked about this before, but other people may not have known it. The 1/3 of 1% on the commercial and industrial construction. We had talked about applying it to residential also.
Yeah.
And you said that at that point the state wants to grab some of that money. Assuming that we did that, we included the residential. How much would actually come to the city? Do you know? In other words, maybe we should give the state some if we get a lot.
Yeah, great question. Oh gosh, I should have prepped a little more. Had I known you were on the call, I would have done a little more research to be ready.
Yeah.
So the way that residential works, so if we were to apply it to residential permits, I would expect, and this is very, very, very rough, and I would have to go back and do new projections based on our revenue estimates at that are being prepared right now for budgeting for next biennium. But our affordable housing fund, we are able to generate roughly $1 million in awards each year. And so that is attaching to residential and some other things that we could not attach this new construction excise tax to. However, like hospitals are in affordable housing, those are no longer allowed to be, and it's just political. But roughly $1 million is what we are able to generate in awards over the last number of years. We do expect that that's going to go down a little with the current economic crisis or climate and interest rates and things like that. It's just slowing construction down. And so I don't think revenues will be quite as much going forward, but that gives you a sense of where we might get to with the new tax.
Thank you.
That would not include the portion that would need to go back to the state. And what I can't remember is if that's 25 or 30%. That would then be allocated towards down payment assistance, which is typically a higher income level than the 30% AMI that council established with this fund. So that was part of the dynamic on it also, in addition to then if we tax residential, then the cost of that residential in theory goes up, right? So those were all the factors just to put it on the table. I'm not going to qualify whether those are all still in play or not. Did that help, Karen? Anything else on that?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, $1 million is something.
Sorry, $1 million is something. Yeah.
Yeah, no, $1 million is a little bit. It's a little bit more.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Roberta?
Quick question. So would mixed use construction, so there's a mix of commercial and residential, would the commercial portion of it be taxed?
Yes, that is, oh my gosh, you all are such a great audience. I love this. It's a really good technical questions. Yes, so when we implemented the construction excise tax, we actually staggered the implementation, and it was so that we could only tax the commercial portion of a mixed use project. So we first started doing straight commercial and industrial tax in March, and then we got to mixed use in July of that year because it was a little more complex to do that breakdown and make sure our math was correct without touching the residential. But yes, that is taxed right now. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Let's see where we get to. Please feel free to holler. You guys, great questions so far. I'm really appreciating everybody paying attention. So we have our 3 shelters. The idea here, just so you know, Division Street and Franklin, one is the turnkey project, turnkey property. The other is called the Lighthouse Navigation Center. Those are permanent, and those will be in effect long-term. The Franklin Street property, former Rainbow Motel, is being used in transition as we remodel the 2. So right now, everybody who's in Bed Value Inn or Project Turnkey is in Rainbow. That shelter is supposed to be done February, let's hope. We were first thinking October, and here we are, but February is the new contract deadline. Hoping to move everybody back in there. And then over time, we will start remodeling the Navigation Center, move folks into Rainbow while that's happening. Navigation Center has been at an over capacity really for a while now. And so it's going to have some folks in there even as we remodel, which is a bit of a crazy situation, but that's what we're doing to try to keep people out of the elements. So we kept going, supportive housing, keep an eye out for more information. This is called Cleveland Commons. This is going to be a really fun one. I always cry at the groundbreakings for all days. It's just amazing to hear the stories and what we're doing. So affordable rental housing, we really go all in on this type of housing. This is where folks, we're seeing the most need, frankly. There is a huge need at every level of the continuum, as you all saw. Affordable rental housing is really sort of the apex of that, I'll say, in terms of where we need the most production. So we really look at this all the time, and our strategy is not just one and done with the code. After we do typically a lot of process with technical experts, months, depending, I'll say depending on the scenario, lots of process with technical experts. How can we get this code to work in Bend? Then we test it and see how it goes, and then continue to talk with folks about what did or didn't work. So our cottage code is a good example of that. That's more of an ownership product, typically in Bend, but that we implemented in 2015, and then we had almost a year-long stakeholder group revising that code, which was then revised, and then we created a new one to comply with a different bill as well. So SB 8, actually, I'll talk to you about this. SB 8 is one you should know about. Some of you are familiar with some of the actions the state has taken to allow for entitlement and sort of less process for certain types of housing because the need is so dire. So House Bill 2006 does that for shelters, basically removes the permitting process or planning process that's up front and allows for by right development of shelter if certain health and safety related considerations are met. SB 8 is kind of a comparable process, a little different, but comparable idea for rental affordable housing. It doesn't have to be rental, but it does have to comply with 60% AMI and under. So in this case, if you are developing housing with a covenant that will keep it affordable for a term of at least 30 years and it meets those AMI qualifications, zoning is a lot less relevant. You can develop in just about it. Well, you can develop in any commercial zones and even in some industrial zones under this bill. It also makes it a lot harder to challenge affordable housing development by providing attorney's fees and things like that if folks challenge and are unsuccessful. So really trying to pave the way to make it easy to provide affordable housing to our communities. This has been a trend recently at the state level. I would expect it to continue, but I'm not sure what's next. So we will be learning together. We also, I'm really proud of this last bullet, our capital improvement program, CIP. So that's the big projects that we do. You know, Remarket was one of them. The Murphy corridor was one of them. Empire is another one. Big capital projects. And sometimes housing needs certain utilities, let's say, delivered or available in order to build. So our city engineers are sometimes, with enough notice, able to move the timing of certain projects if we can be assured that affordable housing will be, if it'll help them get built in time, basically. So sewer lines, for instance, are one, doesn't change what's on or off the list of getting done. It just might move the timing a little bit if we can make that happen. So that's only happened a couple times so far, one in the Murphy area and one up in the Empire area. But it has been extraordinarily helpful to get units delivered and is a great way to really bring everybody in the city to the table to try to promote the type of development that we most need. So homeownership is also a huge focus, affordable. I think Gina, I saw you on there, so maybe you'll have a question or two for me later, we'll see, but lots and lots of really fantastic product being developed in the city of Bend. A lot of it's very energy efficient. Gina is now, sorry, Gina, I hope it's okay if I embarrass you a little, with Core Community Land Trust, and they are building net zero homes and that are affordable, in that affordable range for people, and they're going to be permanently affordable, which is really, really exciting. Carol, still muted. There you are.
Yeah, I'm trying to work on that.
Yeah.
The SB 8 allowing housing development in commercial and industrial areas. I'm just wondering if that leaves poor people vulnerable to extra pollution, like is typically has been the case in large cities.
Great question. And that's something we look at very closely. I haven't talked a lot about equity in this presentation, but it is absolutely true. It's a significant issue within sort of housing development and where folks are placed. Yes, that's a great question. It's something we're aware of. You can't just plunk stuff down in industrial without very specific things happening. For instance, that industrial has to border either schools or residential lands. It can't be heavy industrial. It only has to be light industrial, and there has to be certain ownership interests, et cetera. Side note, and this is not true for every housing development, but the vast majority of affordable housing developments in Bend receive some form of federal assistance, whether it's through us, CDBG, or like tax credits or state funding in that way. And so nearly all have environmental reviews conducted that look at things like that. We look at any toxics or explosives within a quarter mile. We look at all sorts of stuff, and it has an equity lens kind of as part of it. But great question, and that's certainly something we're very aware of. Karen?
Yeah, has the city really looked at inclusionary or mandated affordable housing?
Great question. And I was actually having a lively internet discussion with somebody on this call earlier today or yesterday. It's all blending together. So great question. We have not yet, and not in any seriousness, I'll say, and here's what's going on. So once again, inclusionary zoning, okay, let me start. Inclusionary zoning, or IZ, some people call it inclusionary housing, is the process of requiring a certain amount of affordable housing be built when folks are building market rate developments. So this happens really all over the country in various different ways. Until 2016 or 17, it might have been that same legislative session, that was also outlawed in the state of Oregon. Oregon and Texas were the last two. I think it might still be in Texas, but we finally overturned that. And the way it was written is really funky. I'm going to tell you, that's my perception. It's a weird bill that was sort of the effect of a lot of compromise, I'll say. So it's not how any of us would have probably designed it if we had a blank slate, but that's what happens sometimes. So it only applies to multifamily developments of 20 or more units. That's the minimum size that you can apply. There's not a lot of that in Bend, though there have been a number more recently. And the way it is written has, in my opinion, some challenges to it. And so it's not something that I would want to implement without a lot of process to ensure that we were able to continue the development pipeline that we need to fit all of those different income levels that we still need housing for, that I showed in that pie chart or in that graph. So it is possible in Oregon now. It is potentially a great discussion, because I think it really goes to values and needs and all of those pieces. I will tell you, economists and builders hate it. So there's a lot of politics involved, but council, certainly, I know that there's at least one counselor who's very interested in discussing it. And so that's another thing that if you all were interested in, you could propose council look at and explore whether there should be inclusionary zoning in Bend. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Sure. Oh, and sorry, quick side note before I move off of that. The reason that I look at it with just a little bit of hesitation is because it has been shown in most of the markets, not all, that it has been implemented to slow down development for a time. And that's really what I want to look at, is how could we, if we were to implement something like that, how could we turn that dial in a way to make it more functional for Bend? But that's sort of the missing piece, I guess, that I didn't mention until just now. Okay. Market rental. So again, AHAC and staff in the housing department look beyond affordable housing as well. And this has been sort of a morphing, I'll say, as the crisis has continued. And this is part of why, Jeff, I see your hand, I'll come right back to you in a sec. Part of why we now have a housing department instead of just an affordable housing department in Bend. For market rate populations or median income above that affordable housing range, you cannot build for the cost that folks can bear or pay for rent or home price. And that's where this is still an issue. This isn't an issue in every city, but we are seeing it more and more in other communities as well. So now we're entering into what the chamber calls workforce housing, what I call middle income housing. And I'm just going to give you all my soapbox, which is that most folks in affordable housing are part of our workforce. Almost everybody has to actually have income in order to get into affordable housing. And so I think that it's a little bit limited to call it a workforce housing initiative when we're really talking about affordable as well. So Jeff, with that, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Lynn. Could you go back to the last slide a second?
Yeah.
So I had, I guess, a question, a comment relative to one aspect of this. It says agreements to bring more land into the city from the county with affordable housing. So obviously there's been talk, and maybe we in the city have done a little of this in conjunction with the county. I'm not familiar if we have or we haven't, but specifically where you have, land outside of the city limits that is farmland, ranch land, it's arid, nothing will ever grow on that. So if you kind of put that on a shelf for a second, and then there was an editorial back several months ago by a former mayor, Alan Bruckner.
Mhm.
And Alan raised the point, I don't know if he was accurate or not, but he was talking about the cost to build single family housing.
Mhm.
I'll call it traditional stick-built housing versus manufactured housing, which to some people has maybe a bad connotation, but it's not. It's probably better than some of the stick-built these days. And he claimed in his editorial that could be built with a savings up to 40% of construction cost.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, have we in the city given any serious consideration to doing some things, looking
Yep.
at things outside of the box versus the traditional types of things that we're talking about?
Yeah. Fantastic question. I love it. Yes is the answer. So this specific bullet, so in Oregon, we have a very tight city limits determined by our urban growth boundary, or UGB. That is all dictated by state law. And I'm going to give you a very oversimplified kind of explanation, and then I'm going to encourage Michaela to get somebody from our growth management division to go into this in a deeper way. But ultimately, in order to prove that we need to expand our city limits, our boundaries,
Right,
and city limits in UGB is not quite the same, but for simplicity, I'm going to use it as such. We need to prove that we do not have a 20-year land supply, and that we kind of go through this massive exercise to prove exactly what zoning based on the number of units, et cetera, et cetera. So we did that and were successful in getting our UGB expanded in 2016. And as part of that, the significant public process that went into that, many landowners wanted to come into the UGB. We were pretty tight at the time, and we needed to expand, and folks were ready. And it's a huge financial benefit to them if their land is brought into the city. As part of that, people voluntarily offered affordable housing provision in order to be considered to come into the UGB with that expansion. And that's what this bullet refers to. So we have a number of different UGB areas where that's true. There's affordable housing being provided, some on the west end, some on the north end, some on the south part of the thumb, et cetera. And then some on the west side or the east side as well. We also have a couple of pilots where we're doing this exact thing. And just for sake of time, I'm going to mention House Bill 4079. There will be some public process with that very early on in 2023. So keep an eye on the council calendar. It's now called Parkside Place. That is a streamlined UGB expansion for purposes of affordable housing. And then Stevens Road, which was the subject of House Bill 3318. Both of those are very different ways of doing sort of innovative UGB expansions for affordable housing. And then if it's okay, I know we're running out of time a little bit, Jeff. I hope that helped. I'm happy to continue to talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I'm
Okay.
pretty familiar with that type of what you were
Yes.
talking about, but I'm more particularly the whole thing of looking at different types of housing products like manufactured
Okay.
housing.
So yes, and we are doing, I have a developer right now looking at doing a modular apartment building that will be like 7-story. There's a lot of different ways to slice and dice. The challenge and sort of the missing piece in all of this discussion about out or up and all those things is the infrastructure. That's where the vast majority of cost from a city perspective comes to. So in this I'm going to use the 2016 UGB example. In that 2016 UGB example, we still have hundreds of acres in the southeast that we have not yet been able to bring because we cannot serve them. And the bill serve them with infrastructure, sewer, water, and roads. The bill for doing that is in the hundreds of millions of dollars just for that expansion area. So the land itself is a part of it, without a doubt, and figuring out how to expand sensibly is one. But even if we had unlimited land supply, we still need the plan to raise money for the infrastructure. And that's what we've been working on now for years, trying to bring all that land in. So that's yes and no is what I would say. And I spoke with Alan before he published that. Manufactured housing absolutely should be on the table. And that's something that I think is coming back into fashion because for a variety of reasons. But it's not quite the silver bullet that I wish it was.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Shannon?
So speaking to that point about $100 million to bring the infrastructure and the strategy of sort of how to create more affordable home ownership is about rewarding affordable housing development, right?
Mhm,
And the flip side of that would be to have super progressive taxes
Mhm.
on new residential construction in the
Mhm.
form of super progressive STCs.
Mhm.
Because we need a different income source,
Mhm.
obviously, to make that happen. And is there any appetite in the city for local transfer tax of homes over $2 million?
Not legal.
Or SDCs that are super progressive?
So neither of those are 100% legal in how the sort of, so the first transfer tax, definitely very interesting, I think, because my sense is that there's political will to look at that. We want to tax the wealth. We want to tax the out of towners. That seems to be, where our community feels okay with tax. But according to Oregon property tax law, we cannot. So that would be a form of tax reform in my understanding, and I'm going to stop there or I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with my lack of knowledge. But what I've heard from our legal team is can't do it, property tax reform. So that I take that at face value. SDCs is a little
Multnomah County has a transfer tax.
They have some, and yes. And so, I mean, we haven't, again, like all these great ideas. I love you guys. I'm really appreciating the questions. I'll just say that because they're really in depth and thoughtful. Suggest all these policy related things to council. They are getting ready for goal setting. And these are exactly the types of questions that they are looking for input from you all on. So I would just really, really encourage you to stay in touch with Michaela and the NLA leadership generally, because I think that some of the things that you're asking are a great shape for what council may want to consider in this next biennium, and your timing for these big questions are great. So yes, Multnomah County has like a wealth type tax like that. So there may be a way to do it. And I just don't know because I haven't been authorized to go research it in quite the detail that I might be interested in. How's that?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going just because I know we're getting close here. So market rental housing, ADUs is one of the examples here. That's a great way to kind of help create additional capacity within the market. I'm gonna keep going. I see, oh, Shannon, I don't know if that's still your hand or not. We also allow in all of our mixed use zones or commercial zones, you can do mixed use. You can put housing there really in almost all the commercial zones, as long as you're also meeting the need for commercial in that zone. Not everybody does that. Let's see. Here is a production map of affordable housing. This is out of date again, but this is where we have affordable housing in Bend as of, I don't know, a year or two ago. This map used to be publicly accessible. We're trying to rebuild it on our new GIS framework. So just know that you probably can't find it now. This is just a screenshot of it, but we do hope to reproduce this. And when it was active, you could click on a little dot and scroll on in, and it would tell you the funding source and what's going on. But the idea is these really are in just about every neighborhood in Bend and increasing. And if we're doing it right, hopefully you don't know that it's affordable housing, you just see that it's a new structure. Some of the developments that we have, actually both of these, let's see, Discovery Park Lodges, which is this top one is this little brown dot right here. And this is Northwest Cottages. That's a habitat development that's actually right off College Way here. Both of those are lovely. And that Northwest Cottages, I think is net zero as well, if not quite their goal net zero. So, and this is our future housing need. This is from our growth management chart. So here's where we are with population. Interestingly, although the census pinned us over 100,000 PSU, which is the population forecast that we have to use for growth management planning, pinned us at under 100,000. So this is what it's looking like for Bend for the near future. So help us figure out how to fit all these folks in and where we go from here. Would really love to hear from all of you and engage with all of you and have you come to AHAC if you are so inclined. Okay, I'm going to stop the share so I can see folks. We still have a few minutes, if it's okay, Michaela, for questions, if there are any other burning questions out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Roberta.
Can we get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, Lynn, I'll send out the slides and the recording and maybe your email in case they have additional questions that I can't answer.
Absolutely. We feel free to poke around on our housing web pages. We're sort of waiting for a website realignment. There's a big project going on to make the website more functional. So there's in a funky place. It's called affordable housing still instead of housing. But you can poke around and see some of the info that I showed you today on there. I'll have Michaela send it out. Really, I did not go into all the details of all the things we've done. So if any of that you're curious what this means or what that reference is, please let me know. I'm happy to explain further. Karen.
It's come up at the NLA that affordable housing is such a big issue in Bend, and the NLA possibly should have a more active role in it. But we also have the Affordable Housing Committee and don't want to overlap with them. Can you give any thoughts about what NLA can do to influence more affordable housing?
Awesome. Yes. So first step is just this kind of thing. Find out more. I'm not, the only person to talk to by any stretch. So I really appreciate being invited to come and talk to you all. I love doing this. I feel very passionate about my work, and I have some incredible staff people that also have a lot to share. So this is step one. Number two is come to AHAC, watch the recordings afterwards if that works better for you. We have them on YouTube as well. And we've noticed quite a bit of participation online, which is great. I love that because then you can watch it while you're, cooking dinner or something like that. Tune in when it gets interesting. That is what I would suggest. You all are welcome to weigh into AHAC about your feelings as well. Come and provide public comment. We've had a couple of HREC members show up and give us public comment almost every time, which is wonderful. I think AHAC really appreciates having that dialogue and the opportunity to talk about why they're making the choices that they're making. And then I think to some degree, we can do some staff level coordination as well. So I know sometimes on housing issues, BDAB and other committees will come, staff members will come to me and say, where are you guys at with this? What's the group thinking? Why, et cetera. And then sort of help take that back to the leadership of the committee and see if it's something that aligns with the committee's work as well. So Michaela and I can continue to keep in touch on things like that. I will tell you right now, the way that we are really looking at affordable housing in the city of Bend is scaling. So we went from a goal of about 100 deed restricted affordable housing units per year being produced in the city of Bend to this current biennium. Council's goal is 1,000 in the pipeline, and that includes funded, permitted, or somewhere in the permitting timeline or completed. So we're rocking and rolling in terms of our capacity, but we're doing this with about 1.5 million a year, which is unheard of. So we are pinching and scraping, and we're kind of at the end of how we can do that, particularly in light of the economic climate and rising interest rates and sort of concern by investors, because this work takes investment from the private sector as well. And so really looking at how to retool, kind of, polish what we have, I'll say, by doing things like creating potentially a rental information office, because we don't have all the information we need to really know what's on the ground. And then really looking at revenue. That's going to be the big question that I think NLA and all the NAs may want to participate in. What does that look like for us? How much do we want to put on the table? What are our options within that? And, what does this city look like in 5, 10, 30 years? So that's going to be a big discussion is my sense. And I think council's ready to have it. So that'll be a good one for y'all. Roberta. You're still muted, Roberta.
Oh, sorry to ask so many questions, but one thing I think would be really helpful for the community to understand is to have a simple spreadsheet that shows all the housing units that have been built, say from, I don't know,
Mhm.
2018, 2020
Mhm.
to now, and then those that are permitted to be built, and have this spreadsheet show number of units, type of units, which neighborhood association they fall in, and how many units are affordable, so that we can
Mhm.
see. Because my perception,
Mhm.
and I know more about things in Southern Crossing, is that there's a lot of building going on, but a minuscule amount of affordable housing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so that I look at it, whenever property is all luxury housing, mix of short-term rentals, that's a lost opportunity for
Mhm.
affordable
Mhm.
housing. And with so much of development being in that higher
Mhm.
level, we're just losing opportunities. And it would be helpful to have that in numbers spreadsheet that we could see. I know
Yeah.
that information is on the city portal, but it's very tedious. You have to do it one by one development.
Yes, I love that idea. I think that would be quite a project. And that's the kind of thing also that I think with like a rental information office, we could really drill into what does this look like and what's the movement that's happening within a community? How many people are being evicted? Things like that. Where are the rental units and what is the vacancy rate by neighborhood or NA, district, et cetera. So great question. I'm just trying to think if there's something that exists like that that would be comparable that I could send you, and I can't think of anything today. I mean, we have sort of the breakdown across the city of types of housing and things like that, but that's not really what you're looking for. And within the affordable, definitely not. So the state is now starting to collect a little bit more of this information, but the mechanism that they use is not perfect. So I'm going to keep thinking about that. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Appreciate that. Karen.
Not to be controversial, of course, but other cities around the country are imposing taxes on income from short-term rentals.
Mhm.
And that money is dedicated to workforce and affordable housing. Ooh, taxes.
Yes. Yeah, so we do have, yes, I'm not the TRT expert, but that is transient room tax, which is exactly what you're talking about. The challenge is, and once again, like it's just one of those weird, quirky things. So there's a state level framework, and a portion of our TRT is under that state level framework, where some is discretionary and some is not. That I think my understanding is that primarily goes to general fund, which funds fire, police, and transportation. And
Yeah.
then there's another portion that is controlled by a ballot measure, I think, from sometime in the early 2010s. And that is very restrictive. And same thing, it's all sort of controlled. So that we do have some discretionary funds from the TRT. I think doing more TRT would, in my understanding, require state level action. But again, all of these things are great proposals from you all. If you think, hey, revenue, we're hearing Lynn, revenue is an issue. we see this need, put it on there. And I think that Michaela can probably help you all define how that would go to council in terms of, we need revenue and here are all the things we'd like to know. What's up? Can we evaluate these? Because this is exactly where AHAC is going to. They've asked council for permission to explore revenue options. And I think we're at the point where maybe getting a more in-depth, rather than me trying to do it in my free time, which is non-existent, getting a more in-depth look at some of these tools and what it would take to get there. I think you're right on for that. So I'm feeling there's some good themes emerging from this group. Michaela, I don't know if you're feeling that too. And I think the two of us might be able to work together a little to try to package some of that for the NLA to consider presenting to council to support the general housing discussions. And then keep in touch with AHAC because they'll keep doing this. And we may do, depending on where council wants to go, the new council, we may do some like interactive work sessions with committees on this topic. I think that would be really cool. So
We don't limit, it almost sounds like is that we need a statewide look at this. And that there's some restrictions in the state legislature. They could change some things to make this easier. But we need someone at the statewide level to put it together.
So I have heard some whispers of such things. So we will see where that evolves, but we are very engaged at state level work too. I think we're looked at as a housing expert for the state on implementability of certain things. So we'll be engaged as time goes on. That 1,000-unit pipeline that I talked to you about gave us a lot of credibility at the state level, because the state pipeline is like 25,000 for the same time period. So Little Bend getting to 1,000 is huge. And just so you know, last time I looked at that, we were at 805. So little ways to go. We need one more good development, big size, or a bunch of little ones. So I'll keep y'all posted. With that, I think we're over time. I'm happy to hang on a couple extra minutes if folks want to, but I do want to be respectful that some of you may be running off. Michaela has my email address and can pass things along. Please feel free. There's also the housing at Bend, Oregon email that you can send, and that comes to my whole team so they can sort of triage it and get it to the right place. Thank you all. Really great questions, insightful. It's clear some of you have been doing a ton of homework, and I hope I didn't bore everybody else. But happy to have the chance to speak to all of you today. I'll hang on for a quick sec, Michaela, in case anybody has some extra questions.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And just so the rest of you know, the NLA is going to be talking about goal setting at the December 13th meeting, as well as the January meeting, which is the second Tuesday in January. And I don't have my calendar in front of me, but yeah, 2 meetings to talk about goal setting. So if you heard anything here today that you're really interested in, consider sharing that with your NLA rep so that they can bring it to the table. And Lynn and I will be doing some work behind the scenes of like pulling together some recommendations or options for the NLA to consider as well. So thank you so much for everyone that's attending. I do have another meeting that I got to jump to.
Okay.
So Lynn,
Thank you, Lynn.
And
Thank you.